am very fortunate that I get to introduce our guest for you today. He is a close friend of Brian's and a recently retired senior pastor. He used to lead Vibrant Christian Church out in Harrisburg and just recently retired within the last year or two. And so I want you to give a warm CCV welcome to our friend Don Hamilton as he comes out to share today's message.
Well, thank you very much. It is great to be here with you, even in this ice cold weather we have here. My name is Don Mark Hamilton, and live up actually in Mechanicsburg, just across the river from Harrisburg, and as a pastor there at Vibrant for 38 years. And I retired the end of May in 2020, about, 2 or 3 months into the pandemic. And I remember thinking to myself during that period, you picked a wonderful time to retire. And so I told my young successor when I left, I said, man, I picked a very good time to retire. Good luck with this mess. And so he, like all of us, has been struggling through the years to deal with this pandemic. It's kind of pain in all of our you-know-what, but especially for church leaders. And I have 4 daughters. A couple of them are here today with their families. Actually, one just lives down the road in Willow Grove. And I was married to a gal named Gail. We were married for 38 years. And unfortunately, in 2016, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And during that time, over about 22 months, she finally passed on and to be with the Lord during that period of time. So she had revenge on me for all the bad things I had ever done to her, in that she passed on my birthday. And I'm sure she chuckled all the way to heaven, you know. It is a real blessing and honestly an honor to be here with you today. I've kind of been in the background watching this church for actually since it was before it was started. I was the president of an organization that we helped financially support the church to get it going. And wow, it's been really great to see how God has blessed all of you and this church family all through the years. So it's truly an honor for me to be here. And I hope maybe something I could share today will be uplifting and helpful for you. I'm now a leader of a new venture, my own. It's called DonMarkHamilton.com, and you can check it out. We have a little table out in the lobby. There's some merchandise you'll see on the theme. You'll hear more about that, and I'd love for you to sign up. I do a weekly blog. And if you could sign your email out there, or just get on Don Mark Hamilton and sign on, subscribe. Check it out. If you don't like it, unsubscribe. That's what I do with stuff. So I'd love to have you share with me in that. So I do some public speaking in nonprofits and churches, and I do some leadership development for leadership teams in nonprofits, working on a couple books, that sort of thing. Quite frankly, since I retired, I'm having a blast. And it's really nice. Well, several years ago, my wife and I journeyed over to Europe, to Great Britain, and we were visiting 3 different ministries that we supported there. One of them was a guy named Larry Kinnaman. He and his wife, Debbie, I've known since I was a little kid. We grew up in the same church together. His dad was the pastor of that church, and he was the youth minister. And I actually did an internship with him during that period of time. We just had a great time together. And I noticed that he was doing a lot of walking and a lot of hiking, and we discussed that a little bit. One evening we were sitting in his living room, and I said, how's come you're doing this so much hiking, Larry? And he says, well, I'm getting ready to take a sabbatical, and I'm going to walk the Camino Way. And I kind of drew a blank. I'd never heard of the Camino Way. And Larry, what's that? And he says, Donnie, you don't know what the Camino Way is? No, I don't. And he began then to describe to me this world famous pilgrimage that is been around since people been walking it since the 800s. Back in Roman times. It's one of the 3 major Christian pilgrimages in the world, and it goes 500 miles across Spain, and it ends up at the Cathedral of Compostela de Santiago de Compostela, where it is, legend has it, the belief that the remains of the Apostle James are interred there. So people have made pilgrimages to that all through the years. Millions of people have done it. The route actually starts over in France, and you go just across the line, you go over the Pyrenees Mountains immediately, and then you're going through dozens and dozens of these gorgeous little villages and little towns and communities. You go over 3 mountain ranges, through all the olive territory and the wine country of Spain, and it's just a wonderful journey. And actually, if you want to learn a little bit about it, Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez made a movie about it quite a number of years ago. It's called The Way, and it's a true story about there was a young man who began to walk it, got caught in a storm in the Pyrenees Mountains and died. And his father went over then and ended up walking the Camino Way himself, and it's his story. It's a great, great story. But that's really what it was all about. And you know, as Larry was talking, something began to well up inside of me. And a seed was planted. A new adventure was revealed to me, and I'm kind of an adventurous guy. And so Larry ended up making the pilgrimage, and he kept in touch the whole time, and we've kept in touch. He kept in touch all through the years, and through a while, a couple years later, I decided to take a sabbatical. I was going to take 3 months, first time I'd ever done it, and guess what I did? Yep, I walked the Camino Way. I enlisted my nephew to travel with me and make the journey. And I got to tell you, it was the most challenging thing I have ever done. Absolutely, hands down. You walk 12 to 21 miles a day. As I said, it's hilly and mountainous. And I collected blister after blister after blister after blister, which made it just wonderful walking. It was the most difficult, wonderful thing I've ever done. It really was. And as I think back about that, and I think of that process that it took for me to get there, it reminds me of what I believe is a secret in life that we tend to overlook. Life gets busy. Life, you're just dealing day in and day out with everything that life throws at you. And it's easy to overlook this little thing. This little miracle is the elixir that drives us in all forward progress. Nothing of value ever happens apart from this ingredient. That ingredient is inspiration. Inspiration. We move forward in life due to one ingredient, and that's inspiration. Walking the Camino Way was one of the most profound events of my entire life. And it all came about as I look back from just a simple conversation in an old friend's living room in Worcester, England. And that friend inspired me, unintentionally actually, to follow in his footsteps, which I did. And so I began to plan for this walk, and I made the walk. But the neat thing about it is that the Camino, walking the Camino for me, accomplished even more. I decided that our church was thinking about planting a new church in an impoverished area in Bolivia and a Compassion Children's Center. And so I decided, why don't I try to raise some money, while I'm doing this walk? And I did. So people supported me, usually mile by mile, Ended up raising $40,000. And then the church put in the rest of the money, and we got to start this new church. You see, inspiration ended up providing something far more than just for my personal development, my personal enjoyment. There is now, in fact, in Bolivia, a church, a new church, and a children's center with 200 and some children in it that Vibrant came to support 230 some of those kids on a monthly basis. That's the result of following your inspiration. But you first got to be inspired, and you got to learn how to keep inspired. The Bible, of course, is full of inspiration. It's just page after page of people's true stories of their lives and events and so forth that are inspiring to us. There's, okay, so all these verses that we memorize and sayings of the Bible that inspire us. And many of us live according to some of these verses. I'm sure many of you could start quoting for me, oh, I've always lived by this verse or that verse. They inspire us. One of these stories is really one of my favorites. And it's a story that took place in about the middle of the 5th century, around 444 BC. And we learn of a man in this historical account who accomplished an extraordinary feat, and his name was Nehemiah. He's one of my favorite characters. The historical account tells us that Nehemiah and his fellow Jewish countrymen had been deported to Babylon. There was a time in history where the Babylonians came down and they just overran all of Israel. They did what conquerors often did then, that is, they deported a major part of the citizenry back to their country so there couldn't be another uprising and so forth. That became the Assyrians and ultimately the Persian kingdom. He was in the Persian kingdom. The Persian realm and the Persian kingdom, it was vast, it was huge. It covered over 2 million square miles. And the king ruled over literally half the world's population at that time. So this was a big deal and a big kingdom. And this is where we find Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a servant in the court of King Artaxerxes. And in those days, interestingly enough, to find out his role, when you wanted to kill off a monarch, one of the favorite ways that people did it was to poison them. It's kind of hard to track poison sometimes. And so monarchs learned to employ somebody they called cupbearers. And a cupbearer had the wonderful job of tasting everything that was going to go into the king's mouth before it went into the king's mouth. So somebody's poisoned, you're gone. We got to get a new cupbearer. But that's what Nehemiah was. He was a cupbearer to the king. And it was a very prestigious job. And obviously, you had to be a person of integrity. You had to be a person that the king totally trusted. And you would spend a lot of time with the king and got to know this person. And we don't know how Nehemiah really came to be in this role. It doesn't tell us that, especially since he was Jewish. What we do know is that Artaxerxes was a fairly benevolent guy from the standpoint of he allowed people to practice their religion, and as long as you didn't cause any trouble with it, you could practice your religion. So that made it favorable for Nehemiah to move into this position. Well, the account tells us that Nehemiah had a brother, and his brother had gone with a bunch of his buddies back down to Jerusalem. And then they had returned to Jerusalem, and they were sitting down chatting one day. And in the course of the discussion, Nehemiah says, "Hey, Hanani, how's the folks back home? How's the folks in Jerusalem? And what's the city like?" And immediately, his brother began to launch into this very, very sad description. He says, "Oh, Nehemiah, it's a mess. You wouldn't believe it. Like, the walls are totally destroyed. They're decimated. All the gates, the beautiful gates of the city have been burned to the ground. There's nothing to protect the people in the community from all these tribes that oppress them, the Ammonites and the Haranites and the Arabs and all these ites that they love to oppress the citizens of Jerusalem and the Jewish remnant there." And he said the people are just totally downcast. They were totally demoralized and so forth. It was a sad, sad story. And immediately, as he begins to hear this, it begins to touch him. Something welled up in him. And it brought him to tears. he describes his reaction in Nehemiah 1:4. He says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days, actually about 4 months, I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. You see, Nehemiah was so moved, he was so inspired, if you will, even by this bad news, he had to do something about it. He felt like he had to do something about it. And so after this period of time went by, he goes before the king, and he's downcast. And you can tell he's sad about something. Well, this wasn't normal for Nehemiah, and Artaxerxes knew him well enough to know, Nehemiah, what's wrong? Something's wrong with you right now. This is not the way you usually act. And so this gave him an open door, and he'd been praying for an open door like this. And he said, well, my king, he says, you know, how can I be upbeat when I've learned that my holy city, my homeland lies in ruins? I mean, this guy loved his people, and he loved his city, his town. And he said, it's a mess. So Artaxerxes, well, what can you do about it? You know, how could I help? And Nehemiah thought, well, funny you should ask. And he says, would you give me some time off to go down to Jerusalem with a group of people and to rebuild those walls? And you know that I would need letters from you to give me safe passage all the way to Jerusalem. And I would also need some resources, that I would have the resources to build once I got there, or to be able to purchase and so forth things. Artaxerxes thinks for a minute, apparently. His wife's sitting there with him. I can already see her elbowing him. And okay, I'll do that, Nehemiah. I'll give you whatever you need. I'll give you the time off, and I'll provide for you a cadre of soldiers to accompany you to make sure that you have safe passage. And so Nehemiah was just elated about the whole thing, as you can imagine. But you know, when I think of this story and how he received this inspiration, there's something that is important for us to understand about being inspired to do good things in our lives. There's something important to note about the sources of inspiration for us. They do not always come in a positive manner. Many times, our greatest inspiration in life will be from a problem we have encountered, a difficulty, sometimes even a tragedy. You know, it's December 16th in 2016, and my wife and I and my daughter were doing something that had become a family tradition for us. We were at the Giant Center in Hershey, and we were about to watch the Trans-Siberian Orchestra Christmas concert. I love TSO. I mean, it's over the top, it's crazy, it's wild, it's what I want heaven to be like. I'm gonna find that room when I get there, and that's where I'm gonna be. So we're at this TSO concert, and we're waiting for a phone call. Well, meanwhile, about a month or so before that, right around Thanksgiving time, I noticed that my wife had been losing weight, rapidly losing weight. And she's a very, very healthy person. She ate right, she exercised, she was not overweight, anything like that. Had generally been a very healthy person. She was a nurse practitioner, so all of that was very, very important to her. And I said, honey, you need to, you're gonna have to call the doctor about this. Well, she'd already been thinking through this. And of course, as a practitioner, she'd also been thinking about what are all the possible diagnoses for what's happening to me. And in that process, there was one possibility, and it was a possibility that she had told me numerous times before, if I ever get sick, there's one thing I hope I never get. Never get, she told me that. Well, we were at this concert. She was waiting on some results from some tests, and the lights are about to go down for the concert to start, and Hershey Medical Center comes up on her phone. She answers the phone. You can see the look on her face. and it was indeed her worst nightmare. My wife, they said, had pancreatic cancer, and it had metastasized and gone into her liver, and they didn't know where else. We'd have to do immediate treatment and more testing and so forth. So we stood there, the three of us, tears, coming down our eyes. What do we do? What do we do? And we finally decided we're going to watch this concert. So we did. We sat there and cried the whole time, but we saw it, and it was the last time that I ever got to see TSO with my wife again. Well, some months passed, and Gail was in treatment, and she and I received an email from a longtime friends of ours, Brent and Tom, and they both worked for Stadia Church Planting, and they had entered into a new partnership with a group that plants churches and transforms villages and communities in Southern Asia. And Tom had a dream. And Tom is a very rational, realist man. He's not a man given to emotion. So this was kind of a take-back for us. He says, no, I had this dream. He says, and in this dream, I dreamt that there was a swell of support for this new ministry, this new partnership. There was just this swell of support. And now what they do is that 25 people at a time would go and be trained for a year and live together in a house. And in particular, this ministry also trained young female leaders. These people are poor as can be. And they train them to go back and plant churches in their communities and their villages. And they also teach them a trade. And so they go back and start teaching people a trade in that community. Well, Tom goes on about his dream, and he finally says, and then I heard these words over and over and over again. Gail's girls. Gail's girls. Gail's girls. Well, you see, Gail was a leader most of her life, leader in church, leader at work. And she and I, we have our 4 daughters, and she and I had been kind of known for a group of people across the country. My daughters are all leaders, and Gail was a leader. And we had always been advocates for female leadership in almost any organization. I guess when you have daughters, that's the way you feel, And so our family was known for this, and they thought, we would never want to offend you in any way, which they wouldn't. But we were wondering, Gail, you would be the perfect person to raise funds, poster child, if you will, and poster family, if you will, to raise support for this ministry, this thing we'll call Gail's Girls. Well, we didn't think too awful long until we said, yeah, that's exactly what we'll do that. We're glad to do that. And so over the next 2 years, Gail raised about $350,000. She put through 2 classes of those young female leaders that would be supported for about 5 years. And in those first 3 years, on average, each of those young ladies starts 5 new churches. And they, again, begin to teach a trade and vocation to people in that community. And Gail's Girls continues now, still raising. We've had a number of classes go through and still raise funds for Gail's Girls. It's a great, great story. We also blogged through the whole process of her cancer. And if you ever want to read on it, it's a pretty inspiring thing. It's called gailsgirls.org, gailsgirls.org. But here's the deal. It was Gail's illness. It was her tragedy that inspired her to make her remaining time on earth count for eternity. And like Nehemiah heard this bad, terrible news, it inspired him to do something with it. Folks, don't disparage your travails in life. Don't disparage. From them will often come your greatest inspiration, your most life-changing chapters, will come because you were inspired by some trouble or some tragedy in your life. Inspiration makes the world go round. You don't accomplish anything unless there was first a seed of inspiration, and we need that. Well, let's go back to our story. So Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem. He quietly goes around the city at night, doesn't tell anybody what he's doing at first, but he's examining the walls, and in his strategic mind, he begins to form a plan and of how they can get these walls rebuilt. Well, he knows that if he's going to do this, he's got to somehow get these people inspired to do this. These walls have been sitting like this forever. Nobody's done anything about it. They need some inspiration here. And so he gives a short but inspiring speech, actually a couple of them over the process of the thing. Here's in Nehemiah 2:17 and 18, here's how he puts it. He says, then I said to them, he's called all these key leaders together in the community. He says, I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem is in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come on, let's rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. We'll no longer be in this utter disgrace that we're in right now. And he said, I went on and I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And that little inspirational speech that originated in a conversation with his brother and his buddies so long ago inspired them, and they said, all right, let's do it. Let's rebuild these walls. Well, it wasn't his only speech, because like every project I'm sure you're familiar with, there comes the time in the middle. It's exciting in the beginning, it's exciting when it ends, but in the middle there's always a time of opposition. And there's always a time where things begin to dissipate and the inspiration begins to dissipate. And so he got opposition from all these tribes that were oppressing them around there, tried everything they could to stop them. And then he got some opposition from inside his own ranks. So finally he realizes, I got to re-inspire the troops. And so in Nehemiah 4:14, he said, here's how he describes what he did. He says, after I looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, he says, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Fight for your families, for your sons, for your daughters, for your wives, for your homes. And guess what happened? All right, we'll do it. And they did. They went back out and they rebuilt the walls. You know, you're going to need inspired thousands of times in your life if you want to keep moving forward and accomplish things. And inspiration over time wanes towards anything that you're doing. It reminds me a lot of like cologne or perfume. I've always liked the smell of cologne, so I wear cologne all the time. But one thing happens with cologne and perfume, you put it on in the morning, right? But by evening, it's dissipated. So you got a hot date, you got to put more on, you know, in the evening. Inspiration's like that. It dissipates over time, and so you have to avail yourself to be inspired over and over and over again. Inspiration leads to perspiration, to get things done. That's a good thing. But if you only concentrate on the perspiration side of it, your inspiration will begin to dissipate and the perspiration will begin to dissipate as well. You've got to allow yourself to be inspired over and over again. And you can put yourself in a position where that happens to you on a very regular basis. Here's some thoughts. Here's some ideas about that. The very first thing is that inspiration comes with your eyes wide open. You got to have open eyes to see it, because it can be all around you, but if you don't notice it, if you don't see that it's there, it doesn't do you any good. You got to realize it and then be able to use it. So you got to learn to endeavor to be inspired every day. Remember, Jesus kind of talked about that. He says, you know, he who has eyes to see and ears to hear, let him see and hear what's going on. You know, I've had atrial fibrillation down through the years, quite a few years now at different times. I've had 3 heart ablations, and I've had numerous cardioversions. The cardioversion is where your heart goes into that fib, and then they got to get you in there and shock you and hopefully get your heart back in rhythm. And so I had that last about a year ago. I don't remember exactly when. But I needed this cardioversion procedure. And honestly, to me anymore, it's not that big a deal. It's just an annoyance. But it always offers opportunity to get to know some new people, especially in the hospital. And I've done it enough times now that there's some of the workers in the prep room who remember me. So I figure, wow, what a great way to meet new people. Just get your heart all messed up and you can meet new people. And maybe I should start a dating app for that or something, And so anyway, I was in this procedure room, and as I was laying there in the staging area, my daughter, had accompanied her good old dad, to this procedure, was helping out, and she gave me a card from one of my granddaughters. And she was an encouragement card, an inspiration card that she had written for me. On the front of it, she drew these little smiley faces. And she calls me Pops. Hope you feel better soon. And had these pictures on the cover. And then there were some verses inside of it. She wrote some often kid stuff in these 3 paragraphs. And here's what it ended with. She said, Pops, here's some advice. Think of the beach. Think of the beach. And then she had pictures of said beach drawn. It was so moving and funny. But there was a better line than that. I shared it with all the doctors and all the nurses that were involved in this procedure because I thought it was so good. Here's what she ended with. She said, I hope you can have a great recovery because I know that this is going to hurt like crap. But remember that I'm praying for you and I love you. That girl inspires me, let me tell you. Oh, my. Can I explain to you really an important axiom in life? Inspiration really is everywhere, but you got to have your eyes open to see it. And it is this secret formula that'll keep you moving forward no matter what comes down the pike in your life. Open your eyes. It's in your backyard. It's in the trees and the flowers. They proclaim it. The birds and the squirrels reveal this mystery. The breath of life is even found in a storm. It's found in a hospital room. The breath of life is in the faces of your friends and your family. Open your eyes and let God inspire you through all these situations. There's a next thing that you need to do, and that is that inspiration can be mined. It can be mined. You can go after it. You got to seek information or inspiration from different resources, and you can learn what those are. Some of it just happens. You look up in the sky sometimes, and I'm just inspired by the awe of God from that. But a lot of times you got to mine it. You got to go after it. When I started out as a pastor and a public speaker, I had to find sources of inspiration. I always believed, still do, that the story is the essence of great speaking. And so I found people that were great storytellers. I mined them out. People in those days to me were like Chuck Swindoll and Fred Craddock and Tommy Oakes and Max Lucado. And I read and learned from all of those guys. And so I found great storytellers to inspire me. The fact is, no matter what your chosen field of career, or the fact that you're a parent or a spouse, a child, a family member, whatever it is, there's people a few steps ahead of you down the pike. There's people that have pretty well mastered it. And you got to seek those people out and watch their lives and listen to them and see. You can mine it for that. Kind of reminds me, in the old days before we had water that we could just turn on, a faucet. There was a time, remember, where they had to go out to a well. Everybody had a well, and you wanted water, you had to go to the well. And you were going to have to go back to the well over and over and over again. You're going to be dehydrated, you're going to have what you need. And inspiration's like that. It's got to be mined daily. You go back over and over and over again to those sources of inspiration for you. keep going to the well. So the question I ask you about that is, what are your wells? What is the well that provides you that, especially when that bad news comes? You're going to need to be inspired to keep going. Well, there's another way that this happens that's very important to understand. Inspiration doesn't surface in a cluttered mind. It doesn't happen as well when your mind's cluttered. Over the average course of a day, you know, your mind collects clutter. It just does. So many things are happening. And if you don't take time during the day to unclutter your brain, so to speak, all kinds of things will accumulate. It ends up causing you frustration, anxiety, sometimes just a sense of being overwhelmed because all this stuff has come in here and you've got to handle it. And the antidote to a cluttered mind is to set aside time on a regular basis for decompression, to find that way to be rejuvenated, to be re-inspired. You got to set that time aside. I tell you something that changed my life dramatically back in the early 90s or so. I finally learned on a much more consistent basis that, Hamilton, you got to set time aside every day, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour or whatever. And you got to feed yourself. For me, that means talking with God. It means reading the Bible regularly. I journal my prayers, have for years and years and years. And I get inspired. My mind gets decluttered. And God can move in that mind and inspire me. You think about a Bible verse or two that inspires you and lifts you up. Other inspirational reading. Some inspiration is there just to enjoy, but others is there that you got a mind for these things, and it happens in a decluttered mind. Some inspiration then also means a call to action. Inspiration is often a call to action. Without action, inspiration lies dormant. And often we do get inspired for something, and years later it surfaces. But many times it's right here and right now that we need to act on it. And it incites perspiration, if you will. And that perspiration gets things done, but it'll dissipate if you don't act on it. It's designed to be that way. So here's the deal with Nehemiah's inspiration, with his faith, with his great leadership. The walls once again protected the citizens of Jerusalem like that they hadn't before. The city had laid in ruins for over a century, and nobody had the chutzpah to do anything about it. Nobody. Until this guy who lived 1,000 miles away, at the right place at the right time, allowed himself to be inspired and then put that inspiration to work. And because of it, he didn't just build a wall, he built a people, changed their whole lives again. Amazing. You know, he went there and made these speeches, and people just sitting there waiting to be inspired. You know, maybe you're here today, and the walls of your life, maybe some of them are kind of tumbling in. They're a little bit weak right now. You know, that group rebuilt those walls in an incredible 52 days. And you can go to Israel today, I've seen them, and see some of the remnants of a wall that was built all those years ago because of one man's inspiration. For some of you, maybe they need to be rebuilt for you. Maybe you have a struggling or a failing marriage. Maybe the divorce is final. There's been a death of someone close to you. You lost a job. You're failing in school. The grades are not there. You've got a disease. You've got some kind of an injury. The myriad of things. We all experience the results of a very messed up world, don't we? We all do. But inspiration will get you back on track, and it will keep you going. If you learn how to mine it, if you learn how to avail yourself and open your eyes to it, and if you're willing to act on it when God moves in you. You know, there's another part of this that's equally as important. Inspired people inspire people. You will be used to inspire somebody else by walking with the inspiration that you have received. I'd like to leave you just with this statement. Live inspired. Live inspired. God has made it such that you can be the hero of your own story if you learn to live in this manner. Would you pray with me, please? Heavenly Father, we're very thankful that we get to gather this morning, and it's chilly, chilly morning, but it's plenty warm in here. And Father, we thank you that you have inspired us to be here. And Lord, we thank you that you inspire us through your Holy Spirit time and time again in our lives. Help us, Lord, to have our eyes open, our ears open, and to be willing to follow in whatever inspiration you present to us. I pray, Lord, too, for those that may be here, or those viewing online, that if they're going through these struggles, Lord, that you will avail them in whatever way you need to inspire them to keep going, to keep moving forward, and provide them those resources, Lord. And we'll come together time and again, Lord, and just say thanks. We really appreciate it, and we love you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you very much.